it's been 30 years since Lorena Bobbit went on trial for cutting off her husband's penis in a case that gripped the world. But Lorena wasn't the first or the last woman to commit the act of penicide. Now, a new ITV1 documentary that airs tonight explores why women and men are driven to commit this very specific act of violence. Please be warned, though, that it is a very sensitive subject matter. Take a look.
The whole world knows I cut his penis off. There's no way for me to candy coat it. I just said it, right? Because that's what happened.
The trial has begun in the United States of a woman charged with cutting off her husband's penis. It was later sewed back on by surgeons.
Certain women said, well, you know, somebody finally did what I wanted to do it to a man.
I don't think it had anything to do with revenge.
They talk about what I did, but they don't talk about what he did to me.
After you see my story, after you collect all the facts, then you can judge me.
Yeah, it's a case, I think, that many of us remember, isn't it, Carl?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it was such a big story at the time. It was everywhere, wasn't it? And everyone was kind of... There was jokes about it.
It was, yeah.
And there was people going, oh, can you imagine that? And, oh, she, you know, she just must have been a crazy person. And when I was asked to watch the documentary last night, honestly, for the first 5 minutes, she started saying, you know, I did it. And I thought, oh, I hope she's not going to sit here for an hour and justify everything she did. And I didn't know her story. I hadn't really realised her story. But actually, the more that went into it, I heard her story. I heard the other lady's story, which was tragic. And then it makes you think about it differently. And although I'm not condoning, obviously, an act of violence, it made me understand it. It wasn't just a moment of madness where they had this big row and she, you know, did that. But it did make me think and feel, especially for the other lady, actually, and there was a man involved as well who it happened to him for no reason at all. And it made me feel more seeing them as just as much as the victims as the men that they hurt, really.
Well, yeah, it was... Because we all watched it... last night, and what I found really interesting is there was a guy that worked in media at the time, and he said the issue at the time was the majority of the media was run by men, and so when they told the story of female violence, as what happened with Lorena, it was told solely from a man's perspective. So very few people understood or knew anything about the abuse that she alleges took place in that home, the sexual violence that took place in that home, which he denies. But that part of the story was never told when it was just solely focused on the act itself. And it's really interesting in terms of how we judge women regarding violence. And her part of the story was simply ignored, Linda, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I wasn't able to download it last night because I was at home on my own. There was no one in the house, and I'm not very good with downloading things and whatever. But
thanks for clearing that up.
But I have read all about it today, and I mean, it must have been a terrible thing because it was actually premeditated. She went out and got a scalpel and then did the deed or whatever. And I remember at the time everyone was laughing about it and everyone was saying to her husband, if you don't behave, I'm going to bobbit you. You know, there was a lot of that going on. But obviously there was a deeper side to it and a darker side to what was going on in their relationship.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of Lorena's case, it was just a weapon that she picked up in the home as opposed to one that she had planned. It wasn't an act that she had planned to do.
The other girl, it was.
Yeah, because there were two. There were other stories that are told within the documentary. But Ida, how do you think... I don't know, how do you think about the way we talk about women and violence and aggression? Do you think that we do judge women more harshly for it? And if so, why?
Well, it's interesting, actually, because what was clear watching the documentary with the themes of sexual violence that were happening to these women, and this was their response, their only means of kind of answering back or taking control. I thought it was interesting. We were talking about the differences, the double standards between men and women, and actually... what I thought was there's almost like a split in my head, whereas with these women, I had a lot of sympathy almost. That doesn't, like you said, condone what they did, but there was an understanding of them being the why. And I think where I turn kind of the other direction is when I hear stories about women hurting their children or their family. And that's where I kind of, and it's weird because it should be across the board kind of the same thought, but I notice within myself that when I hear about a woman doing something to her own children, I get very angry and very upset. And yet with these women who did these to these men, I get very sad for them. So it is interesting. I think I carry a double standard.
Is it an empathy thing?
I think it's an empathy. I think where I expect a woman to have empathy,
Right.
perhaps because I would kill for my children,
Yeah.
that anyone purposely hurting their children, I have a misplaced feeling about it. It doesn't mean that they're not victims too, but that's where my headspace goes.
For a lot of things that do involve violence with women, I think it's the idea that we're supposed to have so much empathy, certain things shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
And I know that was a conversation we had with the Virginia McCulloch case that came to a conclusion last week. That was the woman that killed her parents and lived with them, John and Lois. And it was the idea that a woman was capable of such things and remained so calm. I think it's the shocking nature, because a lot of violent crime, a higher percentage is perpetrated by men rather than women. So we do still find it quite shocking. But anyway, the documentary is on tonight on ITV1 at 9 o'clock. So make sure you tune in and take a watch.